Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Kajsa Ekis Ekman, a Swedish activist, author, and journalist who's currently the editor-in-chief of Parabol Press. Kajsa has worked for many years on the US obsession with regime change in Venezuela, which is what we want to discuss today. So, Kajsa, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Pascal. It's great to be back.
Great having you back. And I would really like to pick your brain about all of the reporting you also did on Venezuela back in 2019 during this first kind of Trump regime change operation. And in general, how would you frame the current situation of where the US is vis-a-vis Venezuela, having its ships, its warships parked in front of it and firing at people, killing civilians off the coast of Venezuela?
Well, I'd say the Nobel Peace Prize came in quite handy, huh? For the US. I mean, this is like, the best thing that could happen. I mean, imagine they gave it to Trump. There'd be lots of protests everywhere. Now they gave it to the person that he wants to put in power in Venezuela, which is an extreme right-wing politician, Maria Corina Machado, who can't get to power by herself. She's been at it for decades. She can't win an election. She can't unite the opposition. She can't even make a military coup in her own country, let alone a revolution of some kind. So she has to ask the US to step in and put her in power. And you can really tell, when it comes to Latin America, when it comes to any type of politician asking the US to step in and help them, take power, this is not the popular choice. This is not the candidate that the people would like to see. I mean, if you have to ask the US for help, and in this case, I mean, she's extreme. She's asked even Netanyahu for help to put her in power. She's asked him to step in and make regime change in Venezuela.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous, but the saga that we are seeing now is really just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Of all the things that came before. Can you maybe give us your assessment also of, let's say, the last election? I mean, Mr. Maduro won the last election according to the to Venezuela's offices, but the United States actually doesn't recognize that. They made it very clear: we don't recognize Maduro as the president because the election was rigged. Because the United States knows what the true outcome of the elections in Venezuela is much better than the locals. Can you put that a little bit in context?
Yeah, so basically, ever since Venezuela nationalized the oil reserves, I mean, I think that's the major thing here when it comes to Venezuela. When it comes to other countries in Latin America, like Cuba, for example, the US obviously wants to change the government there too, but for other reasons. It's not about resources, it's more about, the actual defying of US imperialism that Cuba represents. When it comes to Venezuela, I think the interests are much more material. It really comes down to the enormous interests that the US has there. So basically, the US policy on Venezuela has to do with two different oil firms, and one is Exxon and one is Chevron. So ExxonMobil, what it wants is to change the government now. Chevron, on the other hand, wants dialogue. So the two lines that we've seen from US administrations basically boil down to the difference between these two firms and their take on Venezuela. So whereas Exxon has had this like real militant policy towards Venezuela, has been funding think tanks all over the US to try to get, this regime change going on, to try to sanction the hell out of the country. And it has been successful. If you look at where Venezuela is now, with all the migration that it's had, basically boils down to mainly the sanctions from the US government. And then on the other hand, you have Chevron, which prefers dialogue, and which some say is funding think tanks on its own. So, the US was really hardline on Venezuela up until the Ukraine war, when they realized they can't be sanctioning everybody that has oil. They can't sanction Russia, Iran, Venezuela, all these countries at the same time. So they eased some of the sanctions they had on Venezuela in 2023. And now it seems with Marco Rubio back, he is bent on, pivoting to Latin America and regime change anywhere he can get.
It's but Do you think so? Was it Joe Biden that put a brake on this whole thing? Was it the necessity, as you said, of like not of having at least some more oil resources globally available? Because also the entire point is also the price. You wouldn't want prices to dive too deep. But then again, Venezuela's oil is sanctioned, right? I mean, they are not able to export a lot of their produce, or are they?
Well, that was what was easing in 2023.
Mm.
So, I mean, what's still sanctioned is like government officials. For example, the US has a price on Maduro's head. Like if
Yeah.
you capture him, and hand him over to the US, I mean, they raise the price all the time. Now it's like ridiculous amount of millions of dollars that you get if you hand him in. And I think what they're trying to do now is they're trying to pretend that the whole thing has to do with drugs, right? Because what we're seeing is that every time Venezuela has an election, the US sees that as like, now we have a reason to step in. So as they were trying, like after the election in 2018, they were trying with this Guaidó thing in 2019, where they used a kind of loophole in the Venezuelan constitution, which said that if a president is unable to govern, and that obviously means like he's sick, he's lying on the deathbed, he's totally out of his wits, then the spokesman of the National Assembly can step in and govern for a certain amount of time until elections are being held again. So the US used that at the time to call the spokesman of the National Assembly, which was a certain nobody by the name of Guaido, who nobody heard of. I mean, I went to Venezuela at the time. I was there in 2019. I was asking people, have you ever heard of Guaido? And they said, we never knew him. Like the only thing, this was very funny. They said the only thing we knew about this guy was that he bared his ass in one of these guarimbas, which is a right-wing protest, when the upper class goes out and makes a protest. Now, the upper class, first of all, aren't that many people. Second of all, don't have a lot of time. Third of all, are a bit lazy.
Mm.
So they often pay people to go out and protest for them, right? So they would have these guarimbas, which are basically like right-wing riots, like a protest that where you break stuff and you hope basically that the government's going to call in the military so that then they can say, look, massacre the US, please help. So they were trying to do that all the time. So Guaido became famous because he bared his ass in one of those protests. Like that's the only thing that people there knew about him, when the US from nowhere named him the president of Venezuela. So they were trying to use that loophole. What that ended up resulting in was basically the US handing over all these resources to him that Venezuela owned, and even the Bank of England, where Venezuela has lots of gold, refusing to give that gold, or the access to that gold, to Venezuela's government. Apparently, Guaido was now Venezuela's government for the US and for the EU, for all purposes. Now, that whole thing didn't work out because said Guaido was more interested in touring around, appearing on magazine covers with his wife, and associating with people who weren't serious and who basically just wasted all that money that he was given. So basically, the whole right wing opposition of Venezuela turned on him and started hating his ass. So that thing didn't work. Now they tried again with Maria Corina Machado for this election, which didn't really work out either. She was unable to postulate, so they had somebody else, an old guy, a lawyer who was gonna, appear in her stead. I think it was kind of fast and not so well anchored in the Venezuelan population. He then left the country. So this, left the US in a kind of like, okay, what do we do now? Do we just normalize or do we try some other way? And this is where they found this excuse of drugs.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
because
now basically what they're doing is bombing fishing boats from Colombia, Trinidad and Tobago, Venezuela, and anybody who happens to be in the waters.
So this is basically setting a military embargo without actually calling out an embargo. It's just by making sure that now no ships will get near the Venezuelan coast. That's basically the strategy here, right? So you put military pressure on a coastline without even going the length of trying to make it a declared embargo zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this excuse of drugs, I mean, it must be the worst excuse they can think of. I don't know if anybody in the entire world is buying into that because, first of all, we all know that Venezuela is not the major drug exporter in Latin America. I mean, we all know that would be Colombia. And I mean,
And that
second
doesn't
of
even
all,
account for the fentanyl, which is the United States' largest problem. Fentanyl is not even South America. I mean, most of it comes through Mexico.
yeah, from China through Mexico and is mixed up with God knows what. So, I mean, if that really were the case, like if that really were the case that they were worried, like, oh my God, drugs are entering the country. I mean, what they would do is what any normal country does, which is wait until the boats actually get there, search them, confiscate whatever was on them, um, and try the people for drug trafficking in a court. Instead, what they're doing is they're bombing normal fishermen. I mean, and destroying the so-called evidence because, I mean, if you really thought they were drugs, I mean, would you really bomb it to destroy the evidence? I don't know who is buying into this.
Yeah, and
And it's really harrowing. Like you look at, I was just watching this interview with, the fisherman's family from Trinidad who were bombed yesterday. And, the family was just like, he was just a poor fisherman. Like, why are they killing people like this?
it's
And
insane.
I don't know why there is not like an international outrage about, just extrajudicial killings of fishermen in a water where you don't even belong.
I mean, this was one of the rare cases when the United States was dragged in front of the Security Council. I think
Mhm.
because the Russians or the Chinese or both of them actually said we need to discuss this. But of course, there's no outcome because the Security Council, the United States vetoes just anything. But they at least could force that discussion on them. Plus, at the moment, we're still grappling with the genocide on the other side. So this one looks still comparatively mild, right? As horrible as it is. But the question on everybody's mind is this all the ratcheting up to go to war and to go to a regime change by decapitation? Like the way that they blew out basically any kind of political leadership in West Asia around Israel. Are they gonna target Maduro for killing? Like basically, is this? Where do you think this is going?
Well, who knows? But what worries me is that the US just authorized CIA to do operations on land in Venezuela.
What does
So
that
they're
do, actually? What does that mean to you? Do you think it's boots on the ground? Is this just like activating
no,
CIA
it's not
cells?
the military, it's the CIA. I mean, they're not sending troops, they're sending the CIA. So who knows what they could be doing there? But
But
of
doesn't
course,
this
yeah, they
include
could be
Bay of
killing
Pigs?
people. I mean, so I think the US policy on like how to get regime change in Latin America has been quite different from in the Middle East. Like in the Middle East is much more brutal. They can bomb the hell out of a country like they're doing now in Palestine. I mean, face it, the US are the ones paying for it. They don't really want to do that in Latin America, I think, for a number of reasons. And the main one being that there's so many Latinos living in the USA. So, I mean, you can bomb the hell out of a country in the Middle East, and it won't really affect how people are voting in the US. But I think, and this is just my theory, I think they don't want to have, this debate with all the Latino voters on why their countries are being bombed back to Stone Age. I think what they prefer is like just swift and minimal damage kind of regime change. Bombs they generally reserve for the Middle East and Far East and places like that. But with Trump, you don't know. I mean, you don't know he could do anything. And this Marco Rubio guy, he seems like he wants to leave a mark on Latin America's history.
Right. Um, do you did you see this coming? Like, was there anything in maybe not just the Trump administration, but the general approach of the United States that told you, when the last regime change at Ford in 2019 failed, that they weren't done with it? Because you said in 2023 some of the sanctions were lifted, right? So that was a glimmer of hope for Venezuela. Maybe the U.S. is finally getting over its obsession, and the Venezuelan government has signaled for the longest time that they actually want to have dialogue and to do some cooperation, but without giving up on their Bolivarian past, right? That's how they frame themselves. That's how Maduro frames everything.
Yeah.
Was there hope at that point, or did you say like, nah, this gonna continue?
Well, I mean, it wasn't just in 2019. Like they were making all these small attempts. Like in 2019, they had that thing with a concert that they were going to have in Cucuta, like a humanitarian type of concert. I mean, they brought all kinds of musicians there, big ass names, who were going to play there. They were going to hand out like all these humanitarian aid. I mean, because then they had like this discourse that Venezuela was suffering from an acute humanitarian crisis. I mean, people were starving, right? So when I went there in 2019, I didn't really know what to believe. I thought, what if it is like that? What if I get there and people are really lying on the street starving? I didn't find that at all. I mean, people were fed. Diet there is real bad, but what the problem was inflation. Inflation was rampant, but it wasn't that type of humanitarian crisis that people were starving, as they said. Now, that concert was a big fiasco. As I said, Guaidó and his lodge just basically spent the money on casinos, prostitutes, and whatnot. Then they had this thing where they were going to have private firms and Colombian hired assassins, hitmen, to come with a boat to the Venezuelan coast from Colombia. And then there they were going to jump into vehicles, make it to the capital, and basically oust Maduro. That didn't work out. I mean, basically, and this is very funny. Like, if you look at the people that the US contracts in any Latin American country to make coups for them, I mean, these people are very often scammers. Just look at the history of Cuba. If you look at the history of the people that the US will contract in Cuba, I mean, a lot of them are just scammers that take the US money and, they don't really care. So these guys, like, when they were on the boat, they tweeted Donald Trump, like, here we are, we're coming, like, we're gonna, make a coup. I mean, of course, when they got to the harbor, like, the Venezuelan police was waiting for them. So that didn't work out. Then they were trying this thing with, some of the characters from the opposition, like Capriles and all that they were going to liberate. And, they were going to have all these military people, like, defecting. That didn't work. I think they got 5 people. So they have been trying, like, throughout all this time. They just haven't been very successful. And I think that's the problem that the US faces all over Latin America, because they can't find a significant number of people in these countries to actually lead that change. So they're stuck between, not wanting to bomb, like they do in the Middle East, not wanting to actually invade, like put all these troops on the ground, and raise a hell. And also not having the people in the country that, could do it for them. So I think that's their dilemma. And what worries me now is, what if Trump actually is thinking, because you know what I was thinking when he dismantled US aid? Like, I was thinking, so he doesn't care about things looking good anymore. Do you know what I mean? Because
he doesn't try to put lipstick on the pig. He's satisfied with the pig.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he doesn't care if, you have like this kind of color revolution type of image where you have all these people, students demonstrating, like, we want democracy. Like, and basically all of that has been paid. No, he's not going to pay them anymore. So he doesn't care. So that worries me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems that he has, not it seems, I mean, it's obvious that he has a very much belligerent approach, right? And he thinks that being belligerent is a good thing, right? And renaming the Department of Defense to Department of War is a good thing, like putting the Navy in front of Venezuela and killing killing anything that basically is somewhere in the vicinity is a good thing because peace through strength, right? I mean, he says so. The rhetoric is pretty clear. At the same time, he seems I had this question though. He really wanted the Nobel Peace Prize, right? He said, I want it. And Netanyahu actually nominated him for it, right? So he was a nominee. His name was put forward, but then it was given to this lady. And I had these two conflicting narratives. One is the Nobel Peace Prize committee is a lackey of the United States, putting forward the regime change leader designate. The other one is the Nobel Peace Prize committee did something very smart. It's like not giving it to him, but giving it to somebody whose message he cannot contradict for other reasons. How did you interpret that?
Well, if you look at who's been pushing for her to get the Peace Prize, I mean, it's Marco Rubio. He's been sending letter after letter to the Nobel Peace Prize committee, like, you have to give it to her. You have to give it to her. Like, okay, so why is he doing that when his president wants the prize? Why is he not saying give it to Trump or give it to me? Why is he sending letter after letter saying give it to Maria Corina Machado? So does that government, did the Trump administration know that, there was no way Trump was going to get it, or that it was bad for them if he got it?
Right.
You know, so maybe like what they were actually hoping for was that she was going to get it. And she was so cordial about it. Like when she got it, she was like, yeah, but you know what? This is, thanks to Donald Trump, who's always been behind us. Like, so it's like almost like she's given it back to him.
Yeah.
Right.
So you still have this facade, right? You still have this kind of, but the kind of lazy humanitarianism, lazy regime change operation, very transparent one, while then backing it up with a lot of hard power, very obvious.
Yeah.
I don't quite see the game other than preparing for actual even more military intervention. But as you said, like boots on the ground, even CIA, Bay of Pigs kind of attempt can't be serious about that. I mean, they can't be that dumb, can they?
I mean, they've been dumb so many times in the past. But sometimes being dumb is being smart. Like, you never know. What can you risk? I mean, you try, you fail, so what? I just think when it comes to the Peace Prize, like you see that Europe and the US has like different roles right now in imperialism. So the US is the one that's, going to war or paying the warmongers, whereas Europe is the one trying to explain it away, like explaining why this is good, right? So you see that the Peace Prize coming from Europe, and also don't forget that she was given this prize by the European Union last year, Sakharov Prize, by the right wing political the EPP of the European Parliament, like the center right, all these conservative parties gave her this Sakharov Prize. So you see that Europe is involved in trying to, as you're saying, put lipstick on the pig. Like, so Europe is involved in explaining why all these horrible wars, genocides, military coups are actually good and have to do with democracy and human rights. You see, so maybe that's like our role in the whole thing.
Right. I mean, at this point, Europe is only an annex to an official satellite. I think Europe at the moment is captured more by the United States than Poland ever has been captured by the USSR. I mean, it's quite pathetic, but it serves its role. But the question then still is: do you need to go all the way to military intervention in Venezuela, or can you do it on a lower level? Do you have any indications that something's afoot that we might not have seen yet? Maybe a rogue general, a good old Pinochet 2.0 in Venezuela. Is there anyone inside Venezuela who might actually serve as this kind of springboard into getting rid of Maduro, short of military, short of U.S. external intervention?
So I think that's where Venezuela learned from the coup in Chile and what happened to Allende. And I think if you look at the development in Latin America, I mean, you have to understand what the killing of Allende and the military coup, which Kissinger, by the way, was behind, another person that got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mhm.
He was bragging. I mean, these are interesting documents that came out like a couple of years ago. That Kissinger was bragging like, we were behind this, but we're never going to get the credit, because they were the ones that actually saw the danger. They saw when Allende came to power, they said, look, here we have a government that cannot be explained away as a communist government, that came to power by the popular vote, that is more social democratic, but that really can change, things in the region. So we have to get rid of them, basically. And what was learned, this bitter lesson in Latin America, what was learned is you need to have control over the military.
Hmm.
Like, you can't just come to power and be like, la, 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 because not only will you get killed, but your people are going to suffer. Like, especially in Argentina, what happened there was, 30,000 people disappeared, thrown alive out of airplanes into the water, never to be found again. You can't understand what's happening in Latin America without understanding what they've learned from those years. So if you see with the pink tide or whatever that came early 2000s in Latin America with left-wing governments all over the place. So you had kind of two different routes there. You had one that just took power and kept on with so-called liberal democracy. They didn't take power over the military. They didn't take power over the justice system, the universities, the media. They just left everything the way it was. All of these governments were either by lawfare, warfare, military coup, such in Bolivia, for example, were ousted one way or the other. Why did Venezuela stay, for example? Why did Nicaragua stay? Because they learned that lesson from Chile. You need to control your army.
Mm.
Right. So this has been like number one for Chavez and later on Maduro. You need to have a loyal army. And it's gotten to the point where I remember when I was there, people were complaining that military leaders were given posts that they had no qualifications, such as like the previous Hilton Hotel, which was nationalized, and some army guy, at the head who obviously didn't know anything about running hotels. And they were saying, yeah, so this is what we get. But on the other hand, like, this is the price that you have to pay to keep the army close.
Right. Right. So the government has understood very well to keep the army well fed and happy, including appointing people to private or semi-private organizations. In Japanese, even has a name. It's called amakudari, coming from the heaven.
Really?
Yeah, and
it's coming from heaven.
Yeah, coming down from heaven, being handed down, right, and then being put into a cushioned place. It's like it happens a lot over here because like the public and the private sector are very interchangeable quite often. But that's a way of creating loyalty, right? Upward loyalty, and actually societal structure. So you're saying in Venezuela we have something like that with the military being amakudaried down into the private economy, therefore loyal to the current system.
I think what they learned is that, like whatever price you have to pay, like you have to keep the army close to you.
Yeah.
Because if you keep the army close, like there's no way they can get in a foot there and try to, prepare something. So the ways like that the US would have to, how would they do it if they didn't use parts of the Venezuelan army? Like they would have to actually go in, either bombs or troops on the ground. I don't see how they could do it otherwise.
Right.
And I think, yeah, like you're saying, how stupid can they get? Like, I remember when I was there in 2019 and the threat of an invasion, like, when a country, and I think that happened with Iran as well, when Israel attacked, like every time you are about to be invaded by the enemy or the enemy is invading or bombing you, like you kind of like, close ranks behind your leader, right? So any criticism that people would have had against Maduro was like, yeah, but we're not going to talk about that now. I went to all these meetings where normal people like were mobilizing against an invasion. Like, they didn't have weapons, but they were like, we'll do what we can to protect this country. Like, we don't want the US to invade. If there's anything that's really strong of a sentiment in Latin America. It's you don't want the US to invade,
Right.
right? Because that's never resulted in anything good at all. So, I mean, if what they want is for people to like rise up against Maduro, like what they're achieving by doing this is the exact opposite. And they're also making everybody in the region hate them. Like, the president of Trinidad and Tobago was before saying, like, yeah, you can just like, take out all the drug dealers in the region, like we don't care. Go ahead and kill them. Yeah, but now it's people from your own country.
So now they will have to I mean, the United States again is showing itself as the bully it is in the entire region, right? And this cannot go down well, and we already see this counter reaction by Colombia, which, and if I was Colombia, I would now be very worried that I'll be the next on the chopping block, right? Because what's the name of the president? He made himself quite a bit of an enemy with Trump.
Gustavo Petro.
Yeah. So the US just implementing its Monroe Doctrine 2.0 now, huh?
Yeah, well, I just hope that they fail. I just really hope that they fail. I get anxious every time, because the thing is, like, sometimes when I give lectures here in Sweden, I say, well, you know that the US is about to go to war or invade a country when like our tabloids start writing that the president in said country has a luxury palace. Because every time, I don't know if that happens in your country too, but like every time it says like Gaddafi has a luxury palace, and usually it's like secret before, like a secret luxury palace, and okay, so they're about to invade that country. I mean, you can just collect like front pages from Iraq, Saddam Hussein's luxury palace, Assad's luxury palace, about the war with Ukraine. Then it was Putin's secret luxury palace.
Oh,
So
I remember very clearly Yanukovych's luxury palace. I remember the day after how they raided that. This is the luxury palace. Well, this is the of the president. Come on, every president gets that palace.
But yeah, of course. No, you never hear about like Saudi Arabian leaders' luxury palaces, but I'm sure they got plenty of them. And this is the way to convince, it's kind of vulgar, trivial way to convince the Swedish population, which loves equality, and hates people who just live in luxury, of course, that, said leader is a really bad person and deserves to die and be overthrown, right? Because he has a luxury palace. So I was saying, like, I think about a month ago, I was saying, like, oh, now Maduro's saying that the US is about to invade, but I don't think so because I haven't seen any articles about his luxury palace. We did see it in 2019 with, his wife, and they were saying his wife is so rich. Now, with the Nobel Peace Prize, I said, oh my God, here we go. Because now all of a sudden the media is filled with articles about what a horrible dictatorship Venezuela is, what a great lady and feminist, why? Maria Corina Machado is, and her, courageous fight against tyranny and torture. So you think, okay, they got it. Now I'm scared.
It's just, at this point, it gets more and more transparent. At least to me, I seriously wonder how long can this still work with our local populations, because they've been doing that time and time again of building up these clown figures, which like clownishly are elevated to being human rights leaders, and it goes with Navalny as well and his wife, and it goes with this supposed leader in Belarus, this lady, and they do that time and time again. They try to do it halfway successfully with Millet, but even though the guy had a chainsaw in his hand, but they managed to kind of rebrand the chainsaw into like liberation saw or whatnot. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think one also has to look at like there is a new player on the scene, and that's the European extreme right. They're getting into this, and I'm wondering if they're being paid by either the US lobby or the exiled Cubans, Venezuelans in Miami. Because what we're seeing here, for example, I was in Cuba 2 weeks ago as well. And, that's another country that the US is really right now trying to strangle. I mean, really trying to strangle, I mean, because they've had sanctions. I mean, it's been the longest sanctions in, I think, the history of the human existence.
Yeah, over
I mean,
60 years.
65 years of sanctions. I don't know of any other country that's had sanctions for that long. But then again, there are sanctions and sanctions. I mean, every country that's being blocked has some way of getting things, so that's always been the case. And Cuba had, a powerful friend in the Soviet Union and so on. Now, what you got is you got like a blockade that's being applied, like to the millimeter. So if any product has like more than 10% US American components, it cannot be sold to Cuba, and vice versa. So, and also, the Helms-Burton law, which stipulates that if a company has a branch in the US, it can't do business with Cuba, right? So it can be sued in the US court. And that's why, like, when the Swedish company Ericsson was gonna, go there and install internets back in the days, the US courts told them, well, either you have to cease all operations in the US,
Yeah.
or we're going to, fine the hell out of you. So, of course, Ericsson pulled out. Cuba got no internet. And what happens? All the US think tanks, the Castro regime is forbidding internet in Cuba, making all of the world believe that it was the Cuban leadership not allowing their citizens to have the internet. What then happened? Venezuela stepped in after Chavez took over and dug a fiber undersea so that Cuba finally has internet. Now there's Wi-Fi everywhere. It works. But what is the US doing now? Well, they're buying up all the electricity companies from Italy, France, and so on that built, the Cuban electricity system. So when they're buying up all these companies, Cuba cannot get, spare parts. They cannot get technical advisors. So you have all these power cuts. And then again, what they're doing with their think tanks, trying to tell everybody, oh, it's the regime, they can't do anything right. And you see there's a conscious policy to buy up all these electricity companies.
It's utterly gross and grotesque. It's then, it's like putting all of these harshest sanctions ever on Afghanistan and then blaming whatever is left of Afghanistan for causing a famine and so on. When these people are then not even able to buy drugs on the world markets without the banks being threatened. It's absolutely brutal and disgusting. The question to me is if it can run much longer like this, because now we were for the first time in the world where China actually put a little bit of that medicine on the United States with the rare earths. And we see like these changes happening, right? Of actually suddenly there's got to be an alternative suppliers, and the Cubans being then hopefully able to import things from China, although if they probably even just get Huawei into Cuba.
No, they are importing things from China. The problem is that China is not giving away anything for free. Like, China needs to get paid for everything. So if Cuba doesn't have the means to pay, like, there's not going to be any delivery. Russia, on the other hand, can give away stuff. Vietnam is helping a lot. Vietnam does not forget that Cuba helped them during the war. So, but China is more like doing business.
Right.
They don't want doing business with anybody, but you have to pay, though.
Right.
And it's really difficult because right now, the US has this Miami-based application called El Toque. They were trying to do it with Venezuela as well. Like, this is how they raise inflation in those countries. So with Venezuela, they called it Dollar Today. Dollar Today was like an application that decided what the local currency was worth versus the dollar. So basically manipulated so as to make the currency worthless. Everybody was using Dollar Today. Now, Venezuela's government managed to break Dollar Today. Like, that's not functioning anymore. Now, if you go to the application, it's a news site. But that's it. But now they're doing with Cuba. So they have El Toque. Every day, people are looking at El Toque. So what is the peso worth versus the dollar? So it used to be 25 pesos per dollar. Today, it's like 460. Now, keep in mind that the official exchange rate is about like 130. But El Toque, financed by National Endowment for Democracy, among others, decides that it's 460, rendering the Cuban currency worthless. So this means that the purchasing power of Cubans now is zero. So that's why you get all the migration, and people don't understand that. Like, that's why you get the migration from Venezuela as well. That's why you get the migration from Cuba as well, because people can't buy anything with what they're earning because there is a currency war. And then what do they say? Oh, these are refugees. Man, okay, you can have refugees that are like prominent people that are speaking out. Like, that's what you would call a political refugee. Like, I'm being persecuted by my government because I wrote this book, I said this and that, I was in prison. Okay. Or you can have during a war, there is refugees fleeing war. Now, if you have millions and millions of people leaving a country in peacetime, they're not refugees, they're migrants. You get migrants from Mexico, you get migrants from Puerto Rico, you get migrants from Venezuela, but all of a sudden when it's Venezuela, oh, the refugees.
Right.
Okay, if you ask them, why are you leaving? Oh, because the economy. They're not saying I'm leaving because my government has something particular against me.
It's an insane way, and again, like you then again blame the very countries that you enacted these policies against in the first place, for not being able to evade your sanctions, right? For your sanctions actually doing what you promised that they would do. But
Yeah.
I mean, you should, maybe just to end also on this note, I believe that this cannot work much longer anymore. I mean, when Cuba defied this for 60 years, Venezuela has been defying this for the last decades. So, do you interpret what currently is happening again with Venezuela as another last-ditch effort of the US to really, again, kind of assert itself, its dominance, and maybe with that drive, even being willing to go to military effort? Or is it just the latest kind of, oh, let's just try something new, let's try a little bit of intervention, like military?
I wish I was so positive like all the other BRICS people are.
Mm.
They're saying the US empire is now singing on its last verse. Like, it's going down and BRICS are coming and it's a multipolar world. I can't see it. I can't see it. I don't see that. The US managed to change the government in Syria like this.
Well, after 10 years, 11, they were trying since
Well,
2014.
once they did it, they did it. Right. I mean, they've been witching it, genocide in Gaza for 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody stopping it. I don't see a multipolar world right there. Like, I see a lot of talk, but what I would need to see to really believe in all this, because remember, like, we've been hearing this now for decades and decades. Some people were saying when the US lost the war in Vietnam that, like, this is the end of the US empire. When they lost in Afghanistan, this is the end of the US empire. Losing a war doesn't mean the end of the empire. They've never won a goddamn war. They're still an empire.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like,
do
name
agree.
one war that they won.
The thing is, the United States never actually lost a war. The United States didn't win the Vietnam War, but it was lost by the South Vietnamese. And look where South Vietnam is today, right? The United States, as the United States, didn't never lose. There's only one part of the US that ever really lost the war, and that was the Confederacy. The rest always won or didn't lose.
Yeah, because they frame it as they're pulling out, but no, sorry, you were defeated. You were defeated. Like, the Vietnamese army won. In Afghanistan, yeah, you had to pull out because you weren't winning. So Afghanistan won. Like, I don't see a single war that they won. Yeah, I see lots of presidents that they managed to kill, but that's not really winning. And also, like, the result wasn't exactly what you said that it would be. So for me to really be able to say, you know what, US imperialism is going down, I would have to see a BRICS that has a currency that's really functioning, that has a military alliance just like NATO, as strong, that has military bases like coordinated all over the place, and that actually had the capacity that, say, the Soviet Union had of going in and stopping a genocide. Because we know that the Soviet Union actually did stop a genocide. They were the ones that stopped the Holocaust, not the US. And after that, we didn't get a genocide again, as far as I know, until the Soviet Union fell. And now there's genocide after genocide. Yeah, you could say that what Pol Pot did in Cambodia was a genocide, and who stopped that? The Vietnamese, right? So what I'm seeing now is, without that big block, that was a real powerful block. Like, we don't really have the capacity to stop anything.
Well, I mean, I do think they are trying to develop into a different direction, not into an alliance, but into a network. But again, I would hope that the United States at some point comes around and says like, okay, maybe we need to stop this approach of trying to regime change everybody, but they're not about to. What happens in Venezuela is at the moment anyone's guess, but I hope we can be in touch again once we know more. Kajsa, people who want to read from you, where should they go?
Yeah, so it depends on what language they speak and what language they read. But yeah, they can find me on Facebook, Instagram, where I post everything that I write, and sometimes it will be in Swedish, English, Spanish, French. I just want to add one more note about Venezuela and the US. Like, I don't think it's a matter of an attitude from the US, like, oh, I think we're seeing this is not working, like, let's stop. Like I was saying, like ExxonMobil is behind this. ExxonMobil is a multinational company that needs to, make profit. So what they did when, because Venezuela nationalized the last oil field in 2007. So most of the multinationals accepted that and realized we have to work on new terms here, such as Chevron. Now, ExxonMobil said, no, we don't accept this. So we're going to work for this government to fall down so we can go back as before. So what they did was they went to Guyana, explored oil fields in the water outside, which isn't really clear whether this water belongs to Venezuela or to Guyana. So both countries are claiming this. And now Exxon said, no, so this belongs to Guyana. They bought up the government and found a way to get back in there. You see what I mean? And this was framed like in the whole of the media, such as now Venezuela is going to war with Guyana, wants to take their territory and stuff like that. But you have to look at what's behind. Like, you have to look at what's behind imperialism. There is always the companies, the multinational companies that are running the show.
And wasn't Pompeo the ExxonMobil chief before? Or am I
that
confusing?
Could be. Yeah.
Am I confusing him? Because he was a CEO of one of the really big energy ones. Wasn't he Exxon? But I don't remember now.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
But okay, the structure of the U.S. economy that's then ultimately responsible for pushing the political process, as we've seen. Okay, yeah. Kajsa, thank you very much for these insights.
Thank you, Pascal. Nice talking to you again.
Nice talking to you too.
Take care. Bye.